Welcome everyone to our second series of Alumni Matters video interviews. My name is Megan Meyer, Alumni Communications Officer at the University of Exeter, and today we are joined by alumnus Simon Clark, who graduated with a PhD in Maths in 2018. He works as an award-winning science communicator, video maker, podcast creator, and author, and today we'll be chatting about his career and his work to help make the world a greener place. Thank you for joining us, Simon, and welcome.
Thank you for having me, Megan. I've already enjoyed talking. Before the camera started rolling, we've already had a great time.
We could easily fill another half an hour with just lots of fun chats. So I'm very excited for our listeners to get to meet you and know you today. And I just thought we'd kick off our conversation properly with asking, where did your interest in climate and science communications begin? And I guess what some of the highlights of your career have been so far?
Well, I think I was very much influenced in terms of science communication by books and more media in general that I consumed when I was a kid. I read pretty much every book by Gerald Durrell, who founded Jersey Zoo and did a lot of conservation work, but also people like David Attenborough, Adam Hart Davis, who did a series of TV shows that were like at exactly the right time. Sort of, I assume I was about 8 when I started watching them. That really sparked that interest in science, and without me realizing it at the time, how you talk about science. It was presumably about the same time that I would have learned about the climate crisis. The thing that sticks in my mind was going to the Natural History Museum in London and seeing an exhibit on it. There's an image of the Earth inside a greenhouse that's not an accurate metaphor, but is seared in my memory. So I guess it's an effective metaphor. Pretty much since then, those are two things that I've been passionate about, but I didn't start doing science communication really until actually I was at Exeter. I've been making videos on my YouTube channel prior to that. When I did my undergrad at Oxford, I went to Oxford as a state comprehensive student, so very unusual for Oxford. And I'd been making videos about this is what life here is like, this is what the interview process was like, and trying to basically offer the advice that I wish I'd been given a couple of years previously. And when I started my PhD at Exeter, I realized that I could actually use this platform to talk about the science that I was doing as part of the PhD and surrounding science, because my thesis was on atmospheric dynamics rather than climate specifically. But when you're working in the atmosphere, climate dominates the conversation. That's the most important conversation in the room. So I started making videos alongside talking about my research about the climate crisis. And it was at the point I graduated, I had the opportunity to try and do it full time. And it wasn't paying enough to be a full-time job, but I thought I'd regret not trying. So I sort of took the leap of faith. And it mercifully worked out. And since then, I've had some amazing experiences. We did run an event 2 years ago, and I know it was almost precisely 2 years ago because it was the due date of my daughter being born that we accidentally booked it for. I was on standby with my phone on loud in case I needed to go to the hospital. And my daughter just had a 2-year-old birthday party. So we had that event where we were sort of showcasing the stuff that I'd done and the projects that I've been involved with to a sort of an audience of 100 people. But we also were able to run a speaking competition for PhD students to get them to talk about their research. And that was a real highlight because it felt like paying it forwards, kind of. But in terms of sort of highlights, places I've been and things that I've done, I had an amazing experience taking the train up to Stockholm and actually further on into Norway to give a talk and met up with Greta Thunberg. We sort of went around the city putting up flyers and had a really fun time actually, and ended up watching Eurovision together. It's a bit of a weird trip. Done other things including going to New York to take part in YouTube Climate Week, meeting a lot of other creators. I hosted a collaboration between YouTube and TED at the Barbican in London, again for lots of other interesting creators. I mean, the too many small experiences and interesting conversations and people and artifacts that I now have in my studio here in Bath that I could stop tomorrow and I'd look back and feel like I've had a fulfilling career already. But hopefully I don't have to do that. Hopefully I get to continue for, well, another 10 years at least.
No, I think definitely when you have all of those really inspiring or impactful conversations, those can be those smaller moments or those one-on-one chats or those standing up on a stage and realizing, oh wow, X number of years ago I was just making videos whilst I was at university and had external reviewers, and now you're like stats when I was looking at it. You've made over 560 videos on YouTube, I think it was.
Yep, and those are just the ones on my channel. I think across other projects, I've probably made over 1,000 videos at this point. And the piece of advice that I was given when I started, which was the hardest thing to hear, but is the most accurate piece of advice I've ever been given, was your first 100 videos will suck, and that's fine. Because you don't get to make your first good video until you've made 100 bad ones. Like every time you make a bad project, you learn from it. And it still is the case now. The rate of learning isn't as fast as it was when I was just starting out. But each project you learn, you get that bit better. Except in my case, my first video that really did well was my, I think, 213th video. So it took a bit longer for me. Apparently, I'm a slow learner. But, you know, the simple fact is that you're never going to be good at something to begin with. And the more reps you do and the more videos you make, the better you get at making videos.
No, definitely. I think that's so true with lots of things in life. And nowadays, with how prevalent social media and content is, there can be that like overnight success, like expectation of just, I'll do something and I'll tap into a trend and then it will take off. And for some people it does. But I know there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes. Like if you were training for like a marathon or something like that, it's all of the hours that go before you're doing that race day. And
overnight success takes a really long time. Is something that I've learned. Like, you know, it can appear to be overnight success, but, you know, it takes a lot of work to get to the point where you can have overnight success.
Definitely. So kind of traveling a bit back through time to when that you were starting to make some of those science and climate videos at Exeter. Did your degree or that experience at Exeter play any particular part in shaping those communication skills that you'd already like honed at Oxford and previously in your life as well?
Definitely, yeah. I think in terms of the degree itself, my supervisor, Mark Baldwin, was very much, I wouldn't say necessarily a specialist in communication, but it was something that was in front of mind for him. He knew the importance of a good figure in a paper, giving a good presentation and structuring a good presentation. So I think I could definitely give him some credit for influencing how I think about presenting science. And when we went to conferences, I remember going to San Francisco, for example, for the AGU, he was very keen to look at our poster designs and saying, you know, does your poster tell a story? So that was definitely part of it. And the opportunities that being at Exeter gave me, I had the funding to be able to go to places like San Francisco and Vienna and Reading and, you know, various conferences. Again, just putting repetitions in and being able to feeling confident talking on stage about your work, and especially in front of a group of experts. I think presenting the preliminary results of my thesis in Vienna was one of the most nerve-wracking talks I've ever given. And if I didn't have that support of that mindset of how you talk about science, it would have been much, much more stressful and much worse. But alongside the degree, I was also very active in terms of extracurriculars. I did a lot of singing, which definitely gives you much more confidence being on stage and performing in front of people, because when you're giving a talk, it's just another form of performance. And especially doing student radio with Expression FM. I was very lucky to do a science show with now Dr. Hannah Wakeford, who's a very esteemed planetary scientist in her own right. And we had a great time just making a show every week and being given the freedom to do that, and having Expression as a radio station, there was just fantastic. I look back on my time at Exeter with so much fondness for those kinds of activities, and I'm so jealous of people who get to experience that for the first time, going as an undergrad or a postgrad. And, I kind of want to grab them by the shoulders and go, cherish it. You don't know how lucky you are that you have all of these opportunities, because once you leave uni, being a postgrad especially, that's all you've known. You've known going all the way through school. You have these facilities available to you. As an undergrad, you have facilities like a radio station or whatever. And when you leave and go into the real world, suddenly it's so much harder to engage in those kinds of activities. So Exeter provided a really great environment to hone those skills and to make some really sort of special memories doing so.
No, that's really positive to hear. And I think the latest cohort of students have just turned up on campus or when we're filming this, and it's been so exciting to see them discovering that for the first time. And like you say, you want to say to them, this is gonna be the best time of your life, cherish this, do that, but that you yourself probably would have been like, oh, jog on, if someone else was saying that. But
I discovered all of this by accident. I remember turning up to Exeter and I entered into the main sort of Streatham campus by completely the wrong angle. I think I went through the fire door of the Ram, and sort of stumbled and went, wait, there's a radio station, there's a cinema. It was all just wonder after wonder. I think, if somebody had just laid it out for me, I would have been like, yeah, fine.
But speaking of wonders, in 2022, you published your debut book, Simon, and recorded the audiobook for it. Could you tell our listeners a little bit more about what that process was like? Because I can imagine slightly different to writing your thesis.
Yes, and it was the one incident I can think of where I had a long-term plan that really paid off, because I loved books for as long as I can remember. I wanted to be an author, and so when I started doing, it was actually when I was at Exeter, I started doing videos explicitly about books. I was doing reviews of things that I was reading. I was doing recommendations for, if you want to study physics, these are the kind of books that you should read. And that was very explicitly with the goal of a publisher seeing them and saying, oh, this guy seems to know what he's talking about. Would they be interested in writing a book? And eventually exactly that happened. And when they contacted me, I basically plonked down the summary of what Firmament turned out to be and said, here you go, this is what I want to write. And did. And that book was basically when I applied to universities, I said on my personal statement that I had read certain books. I'd read the Brief History of Time, applying for physics. I'd read The Elegant Universe, and I remember very clearly going to my Oxford interview, frantically reading one of the books that I said that I had read on my personal statement. But those books were always in physics. There was nothing specifically about the atmosphere. There was stuff about weather and there's stuff about climate, but not about the system that actually connects them and how we know what we know about that system. So the social context and the historical context behind our knowledge. And that was basically what I wrote, an introduction to the atmosphere itself, which was an interesting experience. I sort of took a year off largely from making videos. I sort of every now and again would put something out to sort of remind people that I was alive. But it was a very intense process of, initially I thought it would be researching a whole chapter all in one go and then writing that up into a chapter from those notes. And then it took about 3 months to do one chapter when I needed to do it about once a month. So it sort of became a bit more like Gromit laying the track down in front of the train. I was sort of researching as I was writing, and then you pull back and you think, right, okay, some of these things are in the wrong order. Right, let's rearrange all this stuff. Because it was an interesting problem that I knew the science that needed to go in there. There's not really terribly complicated science talked about in the book, sort of all at undergraduate level. But the how we know what we know part was much more challenging, and you just don't get taught when you're a science student, and it generally doesn't appear in textbooks, so you have to go out and find it yourself. So it was almost like frantically putting sort of flesh on the bones of your scientific understanding, and then going through the process with an editor of, right, let's make sure that all the book structure is in the right order, all the chapters are in the right place. Then let's go into each chapter and make sure that all the sections are in the right place. And then within each section, let's do sentence by sentence and word by word. And that process was definitely more involved than I expected. I think editors don't get enough credit, frankly, for you see a book and you just see the author's name at the bottom of the front page, and you think, well, yeah, that's the person who wrote it, but how did the book end up the way it was? And the answer is in small print somewhere, the person who edited it, and normally very largely featuring in the acknowledgements. It was a very interesting experience, and one that did not turn me off writing. I'd like to do it again, but one that made me quite grateful that I have a job that allows me to publish more frequently, because the idea of working on a project for 2 or 3 years and then you put it out into the world and, people don't like it or it doesn't sell, and then suddenly, oh no, you've got to come up with a plan B. Whereas with videos, you have more shots on target. And the audiobook was an interesting experience because I had 2 days to read it out, powered by jelly babies, which are apparently the sweet of choice to keep your energy levels up and not dry your mouth out. The best comparison I can make is it's as if you'd done a piece of art. You painted a painting or a drawing, or you painted a miniature. And then somebody said, you're going to spend 2 days looking at this with a microscope, and you cannot change anything because what's on the page has to be precisely what's in the audiobook. And so you end up reading back your writing and going, oh, I wish I'd tweet that sentence, or that bit could have been improved or whatever, but there's someone in your ear going, no, just read what's on the page, please. And so it was a very humbling experience in some ways, and also just surprisingly difficult.
I've really gotten into audiobooks in the last year because I think it does feel like you're really giving yourself permission to like sit with that space, and have someone like almost talk you through it, like having a conversation with someone, which, you know, sort of doing it in more of a science background I really appreciate, because my background's in humanities, but I love science, but I don't have that background knowledge of it, which is why Fermat sounded so interesting to me, because it was that sort of like gateway of like,
yeah,
if you don't have all of it, this is how you can start to learn.
It was intended to be sort of, taking you by the hand and being like, right, let's talk about this. And especially I think when the author narrates it, you do get that authentic sense of guiding you by the hand through the exhibit at the museum and going, well, this is this thing and this is how we know it, and this then led to this. And for as long as I can remember, always viewed books as like a little pocket universe. You open up the book and you sit on like a beanbag somewhere, and you are sucked into a world that this author has created. And it's that wonderful feeling of being lost in a book, that when you get to the end of a chapter and you sort of look up and realize, oh, wait, man, what time is it? What, it's raining now? I think the idea of being an author was so appealing to me because it's the idea of crafting a universe for someone else to fall into, and having that universe on the shelf is a wonderful feeling. And I as I say, I think I'd like to do it again.
That's like my favorite phrase now, universe for someone else to fall into. That's lovely. And I think, well done. Hats off on the degree and the career and the book, particularly if you had that aspiration to be an author and now you can say, look, there's my book. Did it.
Yeah, now I've got to come up with some new aspirations.
Sort of following on from a bit we talked about there about the complexities of trying to distill topics into things like a book. I guess I was interested in, how do you approach adjusting that messaging for different audiences and formats? And do you think YouTube offers something different in a way to sort of convey that to people?
Yeah, I think I'm influenced here by my wife, who's a teacher, in that at the start of every script, I used to do this explicitly, and now it's kind of implicit. I always write out who I am making this video for and what my learning objectives are. Essence of communication is answering the question of how do you get that audience specifically to reach those specific learning objectives. One audience will have a much more effective way of reaching those objectives than another audience. Like if you were making videos for, say, teenagers compared to, people who are in their 50s and 60s, very, very different techniques within the same format, but also choosing a format. So YouTube is the closest thing, I think, to a universal online format, because it's just such a large site. And what a YouTube video is, it's kind of everything to all people. It's so flexible. Whereas I think in years gone by, it had a very specific meaning. It was very targeted to certain demographics. It's obviously not exactly for everyone, but now there is a niche on YouTube for pretty much everybody. When I'm making videos, I have an avatar of an audience member in my mind who's somebody who's in their mid-20s, who studied a science at uni, but not specifically a climate science, and works at some engineering or tech company in the West, like in a big city in either Europe or America, and knows that climate change is a problem and wants to know what they can do, or be more informed about it. And when you have that specific an avatar, like one person really that you're making videos for, that answers a lot of the questions automatically when it comes to, well, I've got these learning objectives. How do I get this person to understand it? Making videos over and over again, you inevitably do it for basically the same audience within the same platform. If for a book, for example, it's different. That's a different audience that you are targeting. You do, depending on the subject, have to think quite creatively about how you get somebody to generate what we would call a curiosity gap. Meaning somebody sees a video title and thumbnail and they know something already about this subject, but you have created a large enough gap between their current knowledge and what you are promising that they are then willing to click the video. That is the really challenging part of making YouTube videos, is distilling the complexities of your video down to a simple string of text in the title and a relatively simple image in the thumbnail. That's the thing you have to adjust and sometimes iterate over and over again. And YouTube is kind of unique in that is the the really difficult bit, but also what it offers in exchange for that is how vast the audience is and how effective its algorithm is at recommending content to people. It's kind of unique in that way because there are other recommendation algorithms out there, especially for vertical video. But with vertical video, you don't choose to watch something. Content gets fed to you, and you choose to stop watching something. Whereas on YouTube, you are given a plethora of options, and you take agency to choose which thing you are going to watch. That's unique and it's very powerful, but it comes with a very heavy cost to really optimize how you present your content.
I was going to ask, sort of the rhetoric in mainstream channels at the moment surrounding science and medicine has been growing, and sort of like how that carries misinformation and spotlights skepticism. So I was interested in kind of, as a communicator and someone working in that sort of science and climate field, how do you tackle that in your job? Is that something that you have to be very present and think about when you're creating a topic of, I don't know, the president of some country might be saying certain things about climate, and how do we respond to that and cut through the noise?
Yeah, I mean, taking a step back, the reason that skeptic voices are being prioritized in certain areas is because humans are drawn to conflict and we're drawn to drama. It's the same thing that compels us to listen to somebody who says, "Oh, you've been lied to about net zero," for example, and or about vaccines or whatever it is. It's juicy, it's exciting. That's why people seek it out. And because people seek it out, it is profitable. And in an advertising-based sort of economy on YouTube and on other services, the number of views is what will determine what people will make. There isn't a sense of important, in terms of quality of education or accuracy of the information. That's secondary to how many clicks something can get. I've done what I've called Trojan horse videos before that are very explicitly trying to target a climate skeptic audience. For one example being, shouldn't sea levels have risen by now? More broadly, when it comes to misinformation, I've been doing a lot of work recently with misinformation in vertical video format, because that's, at the moment, it feels like climate misinformation is largely unchallenged in those spaces. To slightly digress, I think misinformation in general proliferates on short form content because the conspiracy theory and kind of right-wing approaches to complicated topics like public health, like climate change, often offer very simplistic solutions to complex problems. And that suits bite-sized content, whether that's a tweet or a TikTok or whatever it is. The truth resists simplicity. It's almost always very complicated, which is why I prefer making content in long format. But in the absence of anybody making something that is based on scientific literature around climate specifically, there's a vacuum that will be filled in short form content. And that's what's happened today. So I've been trying to do more misinformation based content on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube Shorts because of that. And what we found is that debunking is not necessarily very effective. If you are explicitly saying, well, this person said this and this is why they're wrong, it doesn't tend to resonate with audiences, I think, because people know that certain presidents of certain countries don't know what they're talking about when it comes to climate. That's not a surprise. Whereas what research has shown to be very effective is pre-bunking. So basically addressing misconceptions about a subject from a scientific perspective before people hear about the more conspiracy-related angle. A vaccination for misinformation. And so that's what we've been increasingly thinking about when it comes to short form content. I mean, we get to release sort of 3 to 5 things a week, so we can iterate quite quickly. The danger, of course, with doing that is that you do amplify awareness of this being a conspiracy. You have to be very careful about how you deploy it. Fortunately, there is quite a lot of literature on this subject. There have been a lot of smart academics who have been studying this for a long time, because misinformation is nothing new. You know, it's existed in a way since, well, information has, since the printing press and the ability to control mass distribution of information. The person who can control what information is stored and how it is distributed and to whom controls what is true. And so what we're seeing now is just the latest iteration of that. And so we can build on the lessons that have been learned from really in the 20th century onwards in terms of identifying misinformation and how we correct it. But certainly what we're seeing at the moment is a turbocharged version of past techniques, because everybody now exists in their own personally curated algorithmic bubble, and it can be very, very difficult to penetrate those bubbles. And it's why I think a key aspect of doing pre-bunking and debunking content online is engaging with your audience's pre-existing interests. So it's, if somebody's already interested in football, making content that is part football, part misinformation addressing, or working with a creator who is in that space already and it's a collaboration. That's something that I would like to do more of, because I definitely haven't figured all this out. We're still working on how to address this stuff. If we ever work it out, we'd probably get a Nobel Prize. So, we're never going to get there, but we're going to try and improve week after week.
We were talking about needing a new aspiration, so
yeah, the Nobel Prize.
I'm going to round off with our final question. So this video is coming out the day before International Day of Climate Action. What would you suggest to our listeners that we can do to sort of play our part and stay hopeful in this space of quite a scary time?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, there are some fantastic not-for-profit organizations that are doing great work around education and action. So to spotlight a couple of them, I think one of the most important things you can do is be aware of what's going on. Carbon Brief is a not-for-profit, does the best journalism on climate change. They do a daily and a weekly newsletter summarizing the biggest stories in climate. I'd recommend them to absolutely anybody. Stay informed. In terms of how you can make a difference, there's an American not-for-profit called Project Drawdown, which collects together resources about different climate solutions and rates them about, how effective they are and how quickly they can be implemented, where they can be implemented. And they've just launched a new tool called Shift, which allows you to answer a couple of questions, and it will tell you, here's what you can do to have the biggest impact, whether that's flying a bit less, whether that is changing your diet, whether that's voting. Those in the UK are the three big ones. It's making your voice heard democratically in terms of policies, because we're not going to paper straw our way out of the climate crisis. It's not going to come from individual action. It's going to come from systematic action. And that means government policy. So making your voice heard in that arena. And then in terms of your individual impact, in the UK, for most people, it's going to be transport and food. So limiting, you don't have to go cold turkey, but limiting the amount of meat and dairy in your diet and flying, say, one fewer time a year will make a big difference. And then lastly, I'm an ambassador for a charity called Cool Earth, which is simultaneously a mitigation and an adaptation charity. What they do is offer unconditional cash transfers to indigenous communities living in rainforests, primarily in Peru and Papua New Guinea. The idea being that these communities have no opportunities to make money often other than logging companies coming in who offer them money to take away the trees on their land. They don't have to take them up on that money. And instead, they can use that money to adapt to the fact that their local climate is changing. And especially these communities will often build water storage for rainwater so that it sees them through much longer droughts that now occur. So that's a very specific one that I think is a great charity to support.
Thank you so much. I'm going to finish off today's chat with a surprise bonus question, Simon, which is, who do you think is going to win the Great British Bake Off? Because we were talking about it before this interview started, and I'm going in now for like a strong prediction, because this will come out, I think, when there's only a couple of weeks left of the show, because I think it finishes on like November 4th.
I could really have egg on my face here.
Yeah, you could, but I'll jump in too, so we can both be wrong.
The two people I can currently see in the final are Jasmine and Tom. And I don't want Tom to win because he irks me. So I'm going to throw all my chips into Jasmine's corner. But I can totally see her getting all the way and then stumbling at the final block and somebody else like Aaron or something sneaking in. But I'm going to all my chips on Jasmine. How about you?
I'm going with a rogue horse, Ian, who has had some difficult weeks. And I don't know whether that's just an unconscious bias because I lived in Northern Ireland. So I'm kind of like, I'm just rooting for him to win. But I feel like he's maybe the reverse Jasmine, where he hasn't had a great start, but then he has the potential to win. So I'm gonna go with a rogue one. But I think you're right. Jasmine and Tom will probably be in the final,
unfortunately.
So we'll see. But thank you so much for your time today, Simon, and for joining me. I hope everyone has enjoyed listening to our chat today. And do keep your eyes peeled on our website and our socials for our next Alumni Matters video, which will be out in a couple of months. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I love talking to you, Megan.